At 52, Christine Baumgartner sat down and said the words she had spent 2 years refusing to say out loud. That single sentence, spoken quietly without theatrics, without a publicist standing behind her, is enough to make anyone who followed the Kevin Costner divorce sit up and take notice. For nearly 2 years, Christine Baumgartner said almost nothing publicly about the collapse of her 18-year marriage to one of Hollywood's most enduring leading men. She let the court filings speak for her, she let the tabloids speculate, and she let Kevin Costner's camp control much of the narrative through carefully worded statements issued by his representatives. Now, having crossed the threshold into her 50s, remarried, and finally settled into a new chapter of her life, she has begun to open up, and what she has revealed adds fresh, deeply human context to a divorce that already shocked Hollywood once. To understand why her silence, and now her willingness to break it, carries so much weight, you have to go back to where this story actually began. Not in a courtroom in Santa Barbara, but on a golf course in California sometime in the early to mid-1990s. Kevin Costner was there working on his swing, preparing for what would become the 1996 sports romance tin cup, and Christine Baumgartner happened to be nearby. At the time, there was no spark, no dramatic meeting of eyes across a crowded room. Costner was still involved with Bridget Rooney, with whom he would go on to have a son. Baumgartner was simply a young woman crossing paths with a movie star who was, by every account, entirely unavailable. It would be years before their story truly began. Fate, or at least coincidence, brought them back together in 1998 inside a restaurant. This time, something shifted. Costner asked for her number, and in doing so made what he later admitted, with some embarrassment, was a strange and slightly presumptuous request. He asked if she would mind waiting exactly 2 weeks before he called. It was an unusual thing to say to a woman he had just met, and Costner has since acknowledged in interviews that it wasn't the smoothest move of his life. But Baumgartner was patient, and whatever awkwardness existed in that first exchange didn't stop what came next. By the time their relationship became serious, Kevin Costner was not just a working actor. He was one of the most decorated filmmakers of his generation, having won 2 Academy Awards for Best Picture and Best Director for 1990's Dances with Wolves. He had already carried massive box office hits like The Bodyguard, Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves, and Field of Dreams. Christine Baumgartner, meanwhile, was a professional model working her way through a business degree at California State University, Fullerton. She wasn't chasing fame. She was building something of her own. That entrepreneurial instinct eventually led her to co-found Cat Bag Couture, a luxury handbag line. She launched with a business partner, blending high fashion with function in a way the market at the time hadn't quite offered. Costner helped fund the venture in its early stages, and the brand found real cultural traction when several of her purse designs appeared on characters in Desperate Housewives. Their romance became exclusive in 1998, but it was not a straight line to the altar. By 2002, after roughly 3 years together, the relationship hit a wall that nearly ended everything. Baumgartner, then in her late 20s, wanted children of her own. Costner already had 4 children from previous relationships and was, by his own later admission, deeply afraid of starting over as a father. That fear was strong enough to end the relationship outright. Baumgartner gave him an honest, unflinching ultimatum. She would wait for him to work through his hesitation, but she would not wait indefinitely. The breakup that followed gave Costner months to sit with the weight of what he might be losing. He has said publicly that he eventually woke up and understood he was on the verge of throwing away real love simply because he was scared of a baby's cry in the middle of the night. That realization brought them back together before the end of 2002, and Costner proposed the following year. They married on September 25th, 2004, in a ceremony that felt, in every detail, like something built for a movie, because in a sense it was. The wedding took place at Costner's sprawling 160-acre estate near Aspen, Colorado, known as Dunbar Ranch. He arrived by horse-drawn carriage. She arrived in a vintage green pickup truck. Vows were exchanged beside a mountain stream, and roughly 300 guests, including Costner's Tin Cup co-star Don Johnson, actor Tim Allen, and actress Mary McDonnell, celebrated under a massive tent set up across the ranch's fields. At the altar, Costner was 49, Baumgartner was 30, The 19-year age gap between them didn't stop the marriage from lasting nearly 2 decades, or from producing 3 children. Sons Caden Wyatt, born in 2007, and Hayes Logan, born in 2009, and daughter Grace Avery, born in 2010. For most of the public, the Costner-Baumgartner marriage appeared to be one of Hollywood's rare success stories. Steady, photogenic, and seemingly immune to the industry's usual instability. That image only solidified when Costner's career experienced a second wind through his role as John Dutton on Yellowstone, a character defined by rugged, old-fashioned family loyalty. Audiences began to conflate the actor with the role, assuming the discipline and devotion Dutton showed on screen mirrored what Costner brought home. The couple was regularly photographed at the Oscars, the SAG Awards, and the Golden Globes, always appearing composed, always appearing united. But behind that composed exterior, cracks have been quietly forming for years, and much of what Christine Baumgartner has more recently acknowledged, now that she is speaking with some distance from pain, centers on just how isolating those final years actually were. Costner had reportedly been reluctant to sign onto Yellowstone in the first place, understanding exactly how much time the production would demand. The show filmed primarily in Utah and Montana, while the family's life remained rooted in California. It took months of internal family discussion before he agreed to commit. And once he did, the show's massive success came paired with a punishing schedule that pulled him away from home for extended stretches of the year. Multiple people close to the couple have pointed to those extended absences as one of the central pressures on the marriage. Baumgartner wanted him present at their Santa Barbara home. Instead, she found herself managing 3 children largely on her own for long periods, in a household that from the outside looked idyllic, but from the inside felt increasingly lonely. If Yellowstone strained the marriage, Costner's passion project Horizon, an American saga, pushed that strain to its breaking point. The multi-part Western epic required an enormous 220-day shooting schedule, and Costner threw himself into it with an intensity that friends and family reportedly found difficult to watch. Baumgartner was said to be unhappy not just with his absence, but with what the project represented. Another massive commitment layered on top of an already demanding career, at a time when their children needed him closer to home. Costner's financial commitment to Horizon deepened the pressure further. He personally self-financed a significant portion of production, heavily leveraging his own net worth and undeveloped land he owned in California to keep the project alive. That financial risk didn't stay contained to studio ledgers. It filtered directly into the household, adding a layer of stress that had nothing to do with red carpets or premieres and everything to do with the quiet anxiety of watching a family's financial foundation tied to one man's singular obsession. To protect their children from the intrusiveness of fame, the Costners had fortified their primary residence, a multi-acre beachside compound in Carpinteria, California, complete with a private baseball field, multiple guest houses, and roughly 500 feet of private beach. On paper, it sounds like paradise. In practice, according to court documents that later became public, Baumgartner felt increasingly isolated inside that fortress, made larger and lonelier by Costner's travel and by tense, ongoing disputes with wealthy neighbors over beach access and property boundaries. The isolation she has since described wasn't just physical distance from her husband. It was a particular loneliness of raising 3 children inside a heavily secured, heavily private world while the person meant to share that world with her was somewhere else, working. By the time she filed for divorce in May 2023, the strain had been building for years, largely out of public view. The couple's official date of separation, according to court records, was April 11th, 2023. On May 1st, Christine Baumgartner filed her petition for dissolution of marriage in Santa Barbara County Superior Court, citing irreconcilable differences, just months before what would have marked their 19th wedding anniversary. Costner's representatives responded almost immediately with a statement expressing sadness and framing the divorce as something forced upon him by circumstances beyond his control. Language carefully chosen to suggest he had not been the one to initiate the split. It's in the details that followed, though, where Christine Baumgartner's more recent, more candid reflections carry the most emotional weight. In her court declarations, and in the quieter conversations she has since had as she's approached this new chapter of her life at 52, she described a moment of genuine betrayal early in the separation. She alleged that Costner informed their 3 children about the divorce during a brief 10-minute Zoom call, broadcast from a hotel room in Las Vegas, while he was away for work, without her knowledge or physical presence. She had wanted to wait until he returned home so they could deliver the news together as a united front. She had even researched how to talk to children about divorce and shared articles with him about doing it properly. He chose otherwise, insisting he had the right to tell the children himself. What has stayed with her, by her own account, is not just that he went around her, but that he was scheduled to be home just 5 days later. There was no logistical reason for the rush. A 10-minute video call, delivered from a hotel room hundreds of miles away, became the moment 3 teenagers learned their family was ending, and Christine has said that moment, more than almost anything else in the legal battle that followed, was the one that hurt the most. The legal fight that unfolded afterward was shaped almost entirely by a prenuptial agreement signed just 8 days before their wedding, on September 17, 2004. Costner had insisted on it, and understandably so. His 1994 divorce from his first wife, Cindy Silva, had resulted in an eye-watering $80 million settlement that had significantly depleted his fortune at the time. He wasn't willing to risk that kind of loss again, and he made that clear to Baumgartner before they married. The prenup guaranteed her a one-time lump sum of roughly $1.5 million, wedding day and first anniversary payments of $100,000 each, and an additional $200,000 toward a new home, along with a year of related expenses. It also contained a clause that, in hindsight, became the most consequential line in the entire document. If either party filed for divorce, Baumgartner was legally required to vacate all Costner-owned properties within 30 days. When that deadline arrived in June 2023, she refused to leave. Her legal team argued she couldn't reasonably relocate 3 teenagers without a finalized child support order in place to fund a comparable home. Costner offered $30,000 a month for a rental and a $10,000 advance for moving costs. But the standoff continued until Judge Thomas P. Andrew ruled firmly in Costner's favor on July 5, 2023, ordering her to vacate the main house by the end of that month. In the interim, Baumgartner moved into a smaller guest home on the same property, ordinarily used for staff, while continuing to fight the broader case. Costner's team, wary of losing shared property, obtained a court order requiring her to photograph and document every item she packed, permitting her to take only her own clothing, toiletries, handbags, and jewelry. The child support battle that followed exposed a side of the family's life few outsiders had ever seen in such granular detail. Baumgartner's team initially requested $248,000 per month, a figure grounded in declarations describing a life of global travel and extraordinary luxury that had become, in her words, part of who her children were. As the case progressed, that number was strategically lowered, first to $175,000, then to $161,000. While Costner's side argued the true historical cost of raising the children was closer to $51,000 monthly, eventually offering a compromise of $75,000. The hearings that followed pulled back the curtain on the family's finances in ways that were, by any measure, uncomfortable. Forensic accountants presented evidence alleging that Baumgartner had spent roughly $188,500 on cosmetic procedures. Evidence Costner's team used argued she had inflated her personal expenses under the guise of child-related costs. The household's average monthly spending in 2022, according to court ledgers, reached an extraordinary $240,000. There were revelations about a $100,000 charge placed on the credit cards of Costner's household staff to fund her legal defense, and an admission during cross-examination that she had accepted a discreet $20,000 cash payment from Josh Connor, a wealthy financier and family friend, during a trip to Hawaii. Money she maintained was a loan, used in part to help her mother. On September 1st, 2023, following 2 days of evidentiary hearings, Judge Andrew ruled largely in Costner's favor, setting final child support at $63,229 per month, a fraction of Baumgartner's original request. Weeks later, on September 19th, just before a public trial over the validity of the prenuptial agreement was set to begin, both sides abruptly signed a settlement, ending the legal war before it could spill any further into public view. The risk of losing that trial and being forced to repay Costner over $1 million in fees under the prenup's fee-shifting clause ultimately proved too costly for Baumgartner to gamble on. The marriage was formally dissolved on February 16, 2024. In an unusual final touch, The court waived California's standard requirement that divorcing parents attend co-parenting classes, a signal, perhaps, that both sides had shown the court they could manage that part on their own. What Christine Baumgartner has chosen to share more recently, now that the legal noise is quieted and she has had time to simply live her life, isn't really about the money or the court dates. It's about what it felt like to be inside that marriage during its final years, the loneliness of a beautiful, heavily guarded home that often felt empty, the frustration of watching a partner's ambition consistently outweigh presence, and a particular sting of learning that even something as intimate as telling her own children about the end of their family wasn't a decision she got to make together with him. At 52, remarried to Josh Connor in a small, private beachside ceremony in Santa Barbara in October 2025, she appears to be someone who has made peace with a chapter of her life that once defined her almost entirely in relation to a famous husband. Her willingness to speak now, calmly and without the defensiveness that often accompanies active litigation, suggests a woman no longer performing for a courtroom or a headline, but simply telling the truth as she experienced it. Kevin Costner, for his part, has also spoken about the toll the divorce took on him. In a 2024 appearance on CBS Mornings, he described the end of his 18-year marriage as a deeply crushing and hurtful moment, one he had no real choice but to move past for the sake of his children. He talked about not wanting to wilt in front of them, about needing to dust himself off and keep going. He has also had to publicly deny persistent rumors linking him romantically to singer-songwriter Jewel, after the two were photographed together at a charity tennis event, insisting in an interview with Howard Stern that their relationship remained purely platonic and that he had no interest in letting speculation damage a genuine friendship. What makes this story resonate, even now, years after the divorce filing first made headlines, is how ordinary many of its underlying tensions actually were, dressed up in extraordinary circumstances. A husband whose career kept pulling him away from home. A wife who felt increasingly alone inside a life that looked, from the outside, like a fantasy. A painful, mishandled moment of telling their children the truth. A fight over money that, however inflated the numbers seemed to outsiders, was ultimately about security and the fear of losing it. These are struggles that countless marriages face, just conducted here under the glare of Hollywood's spotlight and settled in the language of prenuptial clauses and forensic accounting rather than quiet conversations at a kitchen table. Christine Baumgartner's decision to finally speak more openly about those years isn't a bid for sympathy or a late attempt to win a public relations war she largely stayed out the first time around. It reads instead like the natural result of time and distance, the kind of clarity that often only arrives once the anger is faded and a person is standing on the other side of their own story, finally able to look back without flinching. At 52, having built a new life and a new marriage, she no longer needs a public to take her side. She simply seems to want the fuller, more human version of what happened to exist somewhere alongside the court documents and the headlines that once reduced her entire marriage to a series of dollar figures. In the end, the Costner-Baumgartner divorce will likely be remembered for its staggering numbers: the $63,000 a month support order, the ironclad prenup, the courtroom disclosures about spending and secrets. But underneath all of that noise is a much simpler story about two people who loved each other for a long time, built a family together, and slowly grew apart under the weight of distance, ambition, and unmet needs neither of them fully knew how to voice while it still might have mattered. Christine Baumgartner's willingness now to speak about that experience with honesty rather than bitterness may be the most quietly powerful thing to come out of the entire saga, a reminder that even the most public divorces are, underneath everything, deeply private griefs that take their own time to heal.